Exhaustive research and decades-long experience with harnessing geothermal power in Iceland have yielded innovative solutions to capture CO2 and store it or utilize it as a resource.
CarpFix captures CO2 and injects it into the subsurface, where it actually turns to stone in less than 2 years. If we look at the global storage potential of basalts which we inject into, it's way more than what we will ever need for storing CO2 as a part of our climate action.
Carbon dioxide isn't only stored away, it can be a resource too.
Carbon Recycling International has developed a unique approach to recycle carbon waste emissions from power plants or industry and combine that with hydrogen, and out of that we make methanol.
Methanol can both be used as a fuel for cars and ships, and also as a chemical feedstock in various industries. Iceland has the experience and expertise to make carbon dioxide part of the solution. Let us help you give back to the environment.
Good morning. Welcome to this event with a strangest name. The value of our villain. And as you all know, this conference has been very much about the future, has been very much about the threats. But here you're not going to be hearing just about the future. You're also going to be hearing about what has already been done, what has already been delivered. And that's extremely important for hope. And actually, I think the most profound label for this conference actually came from David Attenborough when he opened this conference, and he talked about desperate hope. And that, I think, it captures very much our challenge, which is to, did I lose the mic? Captures very much the challenge that, like one reporter put it, the outlook has improved, but it's still desperate. And this is, I think, a very important framing for the conversations that we are going to be having here. But actually, on a Saturday morning, I think you will be hearing rather positive things here, and I think that's very important. My name is Halldór Þorgeirsson. I'm the chair of Iceland's Climate Council, but I'm also on the board of Green by Iceland, which is Iceland's effort to share its experience on green solutions and offer them to others that are looking for similar solutions. But we have a wonderful panel today, and I would ask you to introduce yourself, and maybe as you do that, you could share a fun fact about yourself. We also will be joined, by one participant that is coming through us through the wires. And I will ask him to introduce himself after we've heard for the ones that are here. So, Damene first.
Thank you. So my name is Valborg Lundegaard. I'm a Norwegian, and I'm heading up a company called Aqua Carbon Capture, which is part of the bigger Aqua group with a 180-year history. So a fun fact about myself, well, I think you may not have guessed, but I've been a ballet dancer in my youth.
So let's stay with the Damene first.
Hello everyone, I'm Edda. I'm the CEO of CarpFix, an Icelandic company that turns captured CO2 into stone onto ground, and you saw more about what we do in the previous video. I actually thought we were supposed to tell a fun fact just generally, not about ourselves. So I wanted to tell you the fact, which I assume you do not know, that actually Mineral storage of CO2 is already by far the largest carbon storage mechanism on Earth. It stores over 200,000 times the amount of carbon stored through all the other mechanisms, whether it's trees or the atmosphere or the oceans, the soil. So that's the fun fact I wanted to say.
And so what is mineral storage?
Mineral storage is actually turning CO2 into these types of stones underground, and this is a natural reaction that is happening through weathering processes and so forth. And this is calcium carbonate. It contains CO2 and calcium. So that's the mineral storage, storing CO2 as minerals.
Wonderful. After you stop being a ballet dancer, maybe you should tell us a little bit why you're here. What brought you to this place?
So I'm a chemical engineer, and I work for the Aqua group for decades. Around 20 years ago, we started developing a technology for carbon capture. It was still early days. The world was not requesting this service, but CO2 was stored on the Norwegian continental shelf already in 1996. But over the years, we have demonstrated that our technology works. We delivered a technology center Mongstad, which is the biggest technology center and test center for carbon capture in the world. That was back in 2012. And now, over the last couple of years, we've had requests from all over the world, from customers who ask us, can we help them reduce their CO2 emissions? So we have started our journey, and we have started delivering the world's first carbon capture plant on a cement facility, which is for Heidelberg Cement, a German company, but the cement facility is in Norway. And the CO2 will be stored in a reservoir on the Norwegian continental shelf.
Thank you very much. I actually changed my mind. I would ask you to maybe wait, because I think it's good to bring in Stefan, that is coming to us through the wires. And so if you would introduce yourself and perhaps tell us a little bit about your background and why you are in this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I'm sorry I'm over the wire, but I apparently couldn't get a ticket to be allowed into the COP26, so I might as well stay home. I'm the CEO of Evergas, which is a Danish gas carrier company, but I'm also the CEO of a joint venture we formed with another gas carrier company, Navigator, which we have called Danunity CO2. We have, for the last year and a half, been looking at CO2 transportation in earnest, and are developing designs and technology to transport various volumes of CO2. And over the last year, we have had the pleasure of working very closely with CarpFix on various projects. If I should mention a fun fact, I thought I should mention something about the company. Then we have typically named our classes of ships after the Chinese zodiac, the year the ship were ordered. And we used to have, or we have, tigers from the year of the tiger. We have dragons from the year of the dragon. And then we had the last class, and there we decided to deviate from our policy on the naming, because it was ordered in the year of the monkey. And we didn't really think it would be appropriate to have a monkey class.
So what do you call them?
We just call them what they are, VLECs.
Okay. Always a good thing, just call things what they are. Johan Snorri.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself and your company.
So my name is Johan Snorri Sigurbergsson. I'm the Director of Business Development at HsOrca. HsOrca is an Icelandic power company, mainly focusing on geothermal. Been around since 1974, so it's been ever growing. One thing about HsOrca, which I think is pretty special, is our resource park. Resource park is an ideology that's been with the company almost from the beginning, where we like to view things that there should be no such thing as waste. And if there's a waste, we just have to find a way how to utilize it. It kind of brings us here because we have, being a geothermal power company, there is natural CO2 emitted into the air. Mm-hmm. And we feel that this should not be a waste. but it should be a value, because the composition of our gases are such that we can easily clean them to be useful for something else.
Mm-hmm. So you're basically creating an ecosystem for innovation then around your operation?
The resource park, I mean, there are 11 companies in the resource park.
Mm-hmm.
All have started quite small and all have grown quite a lot over the years. And they're all built on innovation. They're all built on finding solution on how, they're all connected directly to our power plants, utilizing one or more streams from us.
Yes.
And one of the streams is usually something that you would consider a waste, which makes it quite remarkable. So you have to have innovative thinking to find solutions on how you can utilize that waste. Yes. The best example, of course, is the Blue Lagoon.
What is Blue Lagoon?
Yeah, the Blue Lagoon, of course, this Icelandic spa. How would you describe? I'm not used to describing the Blue Lagoon. It's so common to me. I work next to it. But the Blue Lagoon is this wonderful geothermal spa, basically located right next to one of our power plants. Almost everyone who visits Iceland come there and bathe, go into the spa, and in the beautiful blue water, not realizing that this is wastewater from our power plant. Being utilized. So the Blue Lagoon, the company Blue Lagoon has higher revenues than HsOrca because they make so much money out of it and our waste.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And maybe both of you are coming through from the energy context, but one thing we do understand, looking at the climate problem, it's not enough to decarbonize energy supply. You also need to decarbonize processes and deal with, I understand you are trying to deal with cement emissions, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So as I said, we're now delivering to Heidelberg Cement the first carbon capture plant on a cement facility in the world. And cement is a sector which is normally called hard to abate, and that is because the CO2 emissions comes directly from the cement process, from the limestone process. 60% of the emissions come from that part of the process. So it's not enough to replace the fossil fuels with renewables. You just need carbon capture and storage. And for me, this is one of the key messages, that in order to meet net zero, of course you need energy optimization, you need renewables, but you cannot meet it unless you do CCS.
Okay. Stefan, one thing, I learned a new term when I interacted with you, and that's CO2 tanker. We are used to talking about oil tankers, and your industry is used to carrying carbon in a liquid form as oil and natural gas. So how would you describe that enterprise, actually being in the business of shipping CO2 from sources to either where they could be turned into value? I mean, what is this?
Well, basically we are a gas carrier company, so we operate ships that transport gases, all sorts of gases, from natural gas to LPG, and also a mixture of carrying it down to minus 163 degrees C up to 18 bars pressure. CO2 is a slightly different kind of gas. It has what is called a triple point, which is about 4.7 bars and minus 55 degrees C, where it becomes dry ice. And of course, that's not something you wish for in a tanker. So we need to be careful that we transport the CO2 at a higher pressure and higher temperature than these two characteristics. And that actually requires a type of tankers that are very, very rare in the industry today. So our thinking is to either purpose-build ships for it, or to convert existing ships with different tank technology so we can carry it at the mixture required.
So what's the fleet today? Do we have, what's the current state in terms of carriers that are already fit for this?
Well, today there are a few ships in the industry that can carry around 1,500 tons at a time, and they mostly service in the food and beverage industry.
Okay.
So actually the bubbles we have in the Carlsberg beer, I believe, comes from Norway on a tanker. But our thinking is, of course, to do this on a much more larger scale. And we are involved in a number of projects, but some of the projects involve transporting CO2 from Scandinavia to Iceland in tankers that can be carrying 24-ish thousand tons each time.
So it's like always with developing service. It's this question of chicken or the egg in terms of creating a demand. So I guess the demand perhaps at the moment is low, but set to be growing. And so if I could ask you, Edda, for example, why on earth did this happen? I mean, what triggered the CarpFix search for this solution?
You're referring to the project Stefan
No,
was
I'm
mentioning?
referring more to the
method in general. Yeah.
And,
well, I mean, it's been known for centuries, no, not
Yeah.
centuries, decades, that CO2 mineralizes permanently in the underground. And that this is a very permanent way for nature to sequester CO2. So in the early 2000s, CarpFix was formally founded as a research project, pure R&D project, through international collaboration between Iceland, Europe, and the US. And we set out to see if we could come up with a technology that would allow us to imitate and accelerate this process so that we could use it to mitigate climate change. Of course, this one, when it was still being highly debated whether climate change was a fact or not. But nevertheless, the team behind CarpFix, we were sure that the time would come that people would sort of wake up realizing, oh my God, we have to act now. And then we have to have solutions already available and be ready to scale. So this is what we set out to do, and we are there now. We have proven that the method works. It's ready to be brought to scale. And what we've also done from the very beginning, and I think is just as important as developing the technology, it is to create the human power to be able to take on new projects. So from the get-go, we have actively trained students, PhD students, master students and so forth, in applying the technology, doing the research, the engineering, the trades, works and so forth. And because of this, we already have a large group of people that don't know the technology in and out and are of the next generation that can bring it into the future.
So but the potential, I mean, you have demonstrated the potential with the active basalt in Iceland, but
yes.
What about the rest of the world?
Yeah, so we have been focusing on basalts, and the reason we do that is because they contain a high amount of metals, calcium, magnesium and iron, that interact with the CO2 when we inject it, dissolved in water, and then we have these new minerals forming with the metals in the basalt and the CO2. Yes, we have a lot of basalts in Iceland, but we have a lot of basalts throughout the world as well. And basalts are one of the most common rock types on Earth. And if we combine, they cover about 5% of the continents, the majority of the ocean floor. And if we look at all the storage capacity available, it's hundreds of thousands of gigatons. Whereas if we look at what we have to capture and inject in the coming decades, this is on the order of 100 gigatons maybe. So we have several orders of magnitude higher capacity than what we have to do. So in that respect, the capacity is really endless with respect to climate action. So there is big potential in applying the technology, of course, in addition to transitioning to renewable energy, reducing the energy we need, and of course utilizing CO2 where we can do that. So it's not the solution, but it's absolutely one of the favorable solutions that we should bring to scale rapidly.
Yes. Well, you used earlier, I think, a very important concept, and that's human capacity. And I would want, before I bring the audience in, I would really want all of you to reflect a little bit on this. And if I could start with you, Vilborg, because you've been in CCS for quite a while. And initially it was very much associated with coal extraction and then enhanced oil recovery. But so, not telling the story, but what has been your when you look back at your experience, Is it easier today to talk about these things than when I understand you were involved with one of the first capture actually here in the UK? So
yes.
can you just, how can we build up the human capacity and maybe the power of imagination to actually do this?
Yeah, that's the good question. As I said, we started 20 years back in the Aqua group developing the technology. And 10 years ago, we set up a dedicated company for carbon capture. And we believed at that time, with the UK project, as you mentioned, that the world was ready, that the customers were ready to implement carbon capture and storage. But what we found at that time was that it was too early. So what we could have done was just to put this on the shelf, stop developing the technology, ensuring that we had the competence in the company, but we didn't. We continued. And I think you need stamina in order to make sure that this works. Because we continued to invest in technology development. We continued to look for cost reduction, which is absolutely necessary. So in 2012, we delivered this test center in Norway with a high capacity. It's a large test center. It's 80,000 ton CO2 capture per year. Today, we can deliver a standardized plant of 100,000 ton per year, which is almost same size, with a 90% lower cost. And that has been an important journey as well. So you need that stamina in order to make sure that you're ready when the market is ready. And now, I believe there is an awareness in the world that CCS must be implemented. Otherwise, it's too late to reduce the CO2 emissions.
Yes, thank you. And I want to also talk about this in the context of your partnership, but in terms of your experience, in terms of the human capacity, and you talked about the Blue Lagoon, which was really serendipity rather than planning. It just kind of happened.
Definitely.
But now you're trying to do something deliberately. So what's the barriers? Is it incrementalism? People don't realize how big the scale is, or?
I mean, there are quite a few things. I think HsOrca as a company was very lucky in 1976 when we got a young new employee called Albert Albertsson.
Yes.
He kind of brought the ideology of the resource park and this no waste thinking with him.
Yes.
And he has implemented that within the company throughout the years. And like I say, in some cases in the resource park, it's fluke basically. The Blue Lagoon was not set out to be the Blue Lagoon the way it is today. But through the years, we've been creating more and more chances. Carbon Recycling International are producing green methanol, renewable methanol, right next to us, getting all of their streams directly from the geothermal power plant. Yeah. Of course, they use our CO2, they use water, they use electricity as well, and it's a proof of concept that they've tried. They're not producing methanol today in Iceland, but they're selling the technology all over the world, which again it's a very positive thing. And Iceland, we are a small country. We will not solve all the problems of the world there, but we can hopefully use the power of our minds and create solutions. I mean, CarpFix is a great example.
Yes.
CRI technology is another great example. We have all of these cases that we can refer to and then hopefully export our knowledge somewhere else.
Exactly. But Stefan, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume that the shipping industry is a rather conservative bunch of people. So how would you actually sell this notion that there is a need for services in shipping CO2, and so what's your experience in actually explaining this? Is this, do people see this as a giant leap into the unknown?
Well, let me be honest, whenever I tell people about this solution of capturing CO2, transporting it to Iceland and turn it into rock in less than 2 years, I'm met with quite a bit of disbelief. People just don't believe that it's so easy.
Yeah.
And again, if you look at the three elements, I think carbon capture has been done since the 1970s. transport of CO2 has been done for decades as well. And then you have the injection in Iceland, which is a proven concept too. So it's all proven, and what can actually convince people is that we say, listen, it's doable. We can execute on this in basically either end of the operation, whether it is Argus carbon capture or it's CarpFix's import of CO2, and us transporting it. All of this can go ahead in less than 2.5 years.
Okay.
And to make matters even more interesting, HsOrca produces and has produced methanol in Iceland because you have the access to an abundance of cheap energy. And I think it would be logical for us to look at using methanol for propulsion instead of, and then we could have basically a fully green transport solution. So it will be cradle to grave, getting rid of CO2 from the various industries and power plants in the world.
But in
and I must say, just to get a human aspect on this,
Yeah.
I have 2 kids. One is 25 and one is 29. And they have actually gone to being quite proud of their dad, because all of a sudden I'm coming with solutions to this world's problems and not just looking at shipping or drilling or something else.
So old dad is rocking. But in your case, I mean, you mentioned, because I think it's really important to look at the human dimension of this. And you mentioned that it really helped that you had people know how to drill. You were doing this in a context where a lot of the know-how was already, but there's a huge know-how also in the oil and gas industry in different countries. So if you were now fired from CarpFix in Iceland and you were going to go somewhere else, where would you go? What do you see as the next poster child for this technology or this approach?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even have to be fired. I mean, we are looking outside of Iceland and the possibilities are huge. And the way we approach this, I mean, this panel is just a great example. I mean, we are the experts in injecting, mineralizing CO2 and proving with scientific facts that it has mineralized. We do not want to become experts in capturing from various sources or turning CO2 into products or transporting CO2. So that's why we team up with strong partners throughout the value chain. And by taking on new projects in different parts of the world, we do that in exactly the same way. We are experts in the technology itself. But when it comes to local conditions in Asia or the US or Europe, I mean, then we partner up with those that are experts there and we bring in our expertise. And I think this is the only way we have a chance at meeting the climate targets, because there is really not that much time ahead. We have to partner up, we have to work together across borders, and by doing so and playing on our strengths, then we can succeed.
Exactly. And as I bring in the audience here, can I share a personal story? There's a lot of deep friendships that have developed in this climate process, and I have not been at COPs now since 2018. And when I was greeting a dear friend from Saudi Arabia, his most exciting thing, he was so excited about Saudi Arabia exploring the possibility of doing this with not fresh water like it's done in Iceland, but doing it saline. And so there are, I don't want to leave you with the impression that there are no other contexts where this is evolving. So is there anyone here that would like to now come into the conversation, ask a question, either to anyone specifically or to the panel as a whole? Can you please and it might be good just to place us, if you would just tell us who you are and
Given the urgency of the situation, why haven't governments invested tens of billions of dollars, in your opinion, in carbon removal research and development over the last decade, say? And how would you characterize the interest of sort of private sector investment in carbon removal technology? Thank you.
So this would be to the whole panel. Okay. Maybe let's see if we can do a double barrel. There's one in the back there, and maybe we can then do both of them together. Please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for this very inspiring panel. Matthias Honegger with Perspectives. We are developing the CCS Plus initiative, ways to accelerate deployment of these technologies and removal into durable storage. But that's right now, that's mainly in the voluntary carbon markets. What are you looking to see in the Article 6 context so that international cooperation can actually help accelerate these developments? Thank you.
And just to be sure, Article 6 is about cooperation among countries, basically a notion for using carbon markets under the Paris Agreement. So interest from the private sector, and then what would you wish to see in terms of what comes out of here in terms of the markets? You have been here longer than the other panel members, so maybe I should start with you and giving the others.
Yes, so a reflection also back then 10 years ago when we started setting up a separate company, a pure play company for carbon capture. But we realized then that the market was there. So what has happened over the years? Well, we've seen carbon taxes increases. Of course, we've seen a steep increase over the last couple of years. But also, I would say that there is an increased awareness among all our customers that reducing CO2 emissions is becoming a license to operate. So this is from the industry itself, and there is also demand from investors that they, in order to invest in their companies, they want to see that they are on a journey towards net zero and Paris alignment. So it's a market drive. In addition to that, we see that there is also additional cost related to carbon emissions. And of course, we have to come there that it should be more expensive to continue to emit CO2 than to reduce CO2 emissions.
Mm-hmm. What about the markets? Does that matter in that context, do you think?
The market is yeah, the carbon market is very important. It's still early days, but I see an increased awareness. And I like to highlight, an opportunity with carbon removals. We are working with Ørsted and Microsoft, looking at implementing CCS to Ørsted's bioenergy plants. And here you get carbon removals, or really removing CO2 directly from the atmosphere, since bioenergy plants are by nature neutral. And I think these kind of projects, like direct air capture, is required as well for companies like Microsoft to meet their targets.
Okay.
I was thinking about the private sector and how it affects that market. So I think it's all about money. Mm-hmm. But I think that's at least the case looking back. So either implementing penalties or some incentives was key to get the private sector into doing something. I'm in business development, Icelandic geothermal power company. I talk to different companies from all over the world, and I've done so for over a decade. And no one has been willing to pay extra for being using green electricity. He says, so I can get some dirty electricity elsewhere, I'll go there instead. But I also, the feeling that I'm getting lately is I think it's changing. I think it's shifting from being purely a question of money, and the awareness that it's something that we need to do is increasing. So, and that is a very good thing, because it's not been my feeling over the last years that has been the case, but now I think we are waking up a little bit.
You want to respond to?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the specific question, whether how I feel about governments not putting enough money into what I would like them to put more money into. I mean, it is what it is, and it doesn't just apply to CCS or carbon removal, that there aren't enough support programs or incentives or anything like that. It's basically for all the other solutions as well. However, we do see that where there are strong incentives, the market responds extremely quickly. So the more we can do with any such incentives for carbon removal, CCS, and utilization of CO2, the better. And I really hope that we will see more governments putting such incentives in place. For carbon markets, I'm not an expert in Article 6 or what's being negotiated, but from our side, I think it's just important that we have a clear framework and a transparent framework, because if we're going to use the carbon market sort of as an added incentive, supporting the uptake of new projects and so forth, it has to be very transparent, because people, customers, they cannot lose faith in that, yes, the carbon credits I am buying, they are really removed. So I think, however that is done, if that's clear, I'm happy.
Stefan?
Yeah, you said earlier that shipping is a very conservative industry. I think maybe it has been, or maybe it's a bit of a misconception, because fundamentally earlier at COP26 it was announced that there's a huge push for making shipping as a whole CO2 neutral by 2050. And there are certain parties in the industry who wants to push for 2040. There are some gigantic challenges associated with this, but I think it's quite clear that there's a lot of shipping companies that are very aggressive in reducing the CO2 targets. And you can do a lot of stuff. I mean, we have been reducing our CO2 emissions 25% in the last couple of years by basically being smarter at what we do and shutting off power we don't need and using different hull paints to get more sleek hulls, etc., etc. So there are many things that can be done and that are being done. I think to address the issue of, yes, of course it is money. I mean, at the end of the day, money makes a difference. And I think if you, for instance, look to the Danish government has announced a climate reduction target of 70% reduction by 2030. And part of that is actually a CO2 capturing project that is planned to be injected offshore into some old Danish oil and gas fields. Yes. That adds a lot of complexity compared to what we are discussing with CarpFix, but it's certainly a step in the right direction that carbon capture is now basically in the legislation around climate in Denmark.
Exactly. Maybe just I would see if we can get another question from the audience, but as you are thinking, let's just be clear because I mentioned the notion of carbon markets, it's really important that we think of that also in the context of the price on carbon, because so much of the emissions are not covered by price on carbon. So access to the atmosphere, storage in the atmosphere is free of cost to a lot of economies. Any questions from the audience? Anything that you would wish to understand better? So if you don't have a question, one thing that because we have been focusing very much on, sorry. Oh, please.
Hi, my name is Kristen Larsson from CarpFix. Just maybe for Valborg, your kind of uptake on because we're talking about the prices and the commercial activities and so on. What do you anticipate the price of the ETS, for example, develop in the next few years?
Well, that's...
this is, just to be, everybody is clear on this, this would be the emissions trading system within the European Union and the European Economic Area Agreement.
So I will not give my guess, nobody knows exactly, but what I can share with you is that analysts, they indicate that we will see EU ETS or EUA price between 75 and 150 euros per ton in 2030. And I think that will allow us really, after we've been working with cost reduction throughout the whole value chain, to offer solutions to the market that will not need governmental funding, at least for standardized solutions. And this is what we are working with our partners like CarpFix. We have to get down the cost because this will drive the market, and we have to start now. So we've been trying to find a business model that allows our customers to select CCS early, and instead of going to separate contracts for each part of the value chain, we offer a one-stop shop. They can come to us, and we will carry the whole value chain, working with strategic partners like CarpFix. This, we believe, is a good way to accelerate the market and offer commercial attractive solutions with the indicated increase in carbon price.
Thank you.
If I can just add quickly, I mean, the ETS system in the past 2 years is an excellent example of how sort of putting a real price on carbon really sparks the industry, because we in CarpFix, and I know that the same applies to other green tech companies, we've seen just an exponential increase in interest in taking up our technology, and this is in the end as a result of rising price of CO2 emissions in Europe. So again, we need strong market incentives in place, and then the industry will certainly take off, I believe. And just to add, because this all comes down to cost, injecting CO2 the way CarpFix does it, it's actually very cost effective. We can do it at a much lower price than the offshore continents, of course, because we can do it onshore, and it's also just because of how the technology is developed. So we have demonstrated cost of injection, some lying between 5 to maybe up to 15 euros per ton, and that is extremely economic. Of course, we need to capture it and get it to the right location first, but then at least when it comes to the injection, we can offer a very economic and, last but not least, permanent solution.
Yeah. So I want to bring this together now with a final question to all of the panelists, and I will this time ask Stefan to go first. We've talked here about price on carbon, which is a very important driver, but let's put that aside for a moment and think through what is the role of government and the leadership, global leadership on climate to make these things happen that you are working on. And if you had the opportunity to really talk to the leadership, what would you tell them? And just as you're thinking, one thing, it's really important to understand that no major shifts in energy have happened without the involvement of government. And talking about fun facts, what I found really interesting was the role that Winston Churchill played in going from coal to oil on ships, because he, being in the Admiralty in the First World War, he wanted fast ships. And he said, I can't deal with this coal crap, so I need oil ships. And that really accelerated the introduction of oil into shipping. This is just an example. So what do we need now, either from this conference or from leadership in terms, and governments more broadly, to actually realize the things that you are working on and turn them into something that moves to scale? Stefan.
Well, I think, again, I'm so privileged I'm Danish, so we have a Danish government who is actually working specifically on this, as I mentioned, in the climate legislation in Denmark. But it's clear that you have, for instance, the London Protocol, where you have an addendum to paragraph 6, I think, that allows you can carry CO2 from an emitter to an offshore injection point. Mm-hmm. But I don't think, for instance, that the London Protocol would allow that you carry liquefied CO2 from, shall we say, Denmark or Sweden or Germany to Iceland. Mm-hmm. And that is it's a pretty easy thing to do. But of course it takes time, and certainly how to change legislation like this takes longer than you ever anticipate. And then I think it's you said we shouldn't talk about money, so I won't talk about money. But of course, I think some common target setting would be very beneficial. Now, if you look at shipping, it's probably the most global industry in the world, and we are looking now at many different local initiatives. So, for instance, EU talking about that shipping should be part of ETS from 23, but that will then only be EU. So what about all the ships going from Australia to China or whatever? And then being a ship owner, it would get very complicated if EU decides on one set of legislation, UK then decides another set of legislation, US on a third, China on a fourth, etc. It's going to be very cumbersome. So it would be nice if people could get together and set some fairly aggressive targets for shipping through IMO.
Exactly.
So we would have a common standard rather than having 6 different ambitions pulling in all directions.
So global coordination, removing regulatory risks, and it's actually interesting that both the IMO and ICAO are actually older than the UN, because everybody realized that for globalization we need common approaches. What would be your call to government, and what would you need to this to actually happen?
Yeah. It's basically what's been said. Firstly, we need to bring down regulatory barriers, and this really takes way too long. In too many cases, regulations are simply outdated because we have new technologies that are not included, and we want them to be brought to scale very rapidly. And we can't do that if it takes up to 10 years maybe to change some regulations. So really, that's where the governments have a big role to play to expedite getting regulations up to speed with respect to all the green technology that is part of our global climate action plan. And then of course it comes down to money as well, and risk reduction. In the sort of first scale-up projects. It's not really fair for individual players in the market to have to take on all the risk. It has to be somehow the common agenda to share the risk, and that's where the governments can step in. And this can be through various measures. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a big check. Of course, if that's available, then yes, please. But if not, I mean, there are other ways to assist with risk reduction. So I think those would be the two aspects that I would like to say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Johan?
It gets harder and harder to answer as you people who come before you. So I agree completely with what two of them have been saying. I think one of the things that I'm a little bit thinking a bit locally is just set a course and stick to it, because sometimes I feel that you're walking in both directions somehow without realizing what you want to do and find a way to do it. We see it in Iceland with many different incentives that the government have been doing, and you never know if there's going to be the same incentive next year until December 31st or something. So for planning ahead, and that's about the risk reduction as well, if you want to plan ahead, the government has to be kind of consistent in what they're doing.
Yeah, I also support, of course, everything that has been said so far. Let me try to add on just saying that I believe COP26 is a unique example of how countries come together and discuss a global challenge. We need that collaboration across the countries, in addition to setting specific target for each countries. And also, we have to acknowledge that rich countries have a special responsibility beyond the emissions in their own country. So by accelerating the market, ensuring that the technology develops, the costs are reduced, and also take your responsibilities for countries that are not in a position to do so.
Yes, exactly. So this brings us to a close. I want to go back to where I started about the notion of desperate hope. I think there is hope, but there is also enormous pressure in terms of time, and we're basically dealing with an emergency. And that is something that humans are also very good at, because emergency focuses the mind. But we also need to build on the things we know. And so one of the things that I take away from this conversation is how what they are talking about is all based on know-how that has developed through time. So we need to combine the things that we have learned, but bring in innovation, but do it with a sense of urgency. So I thank you all very much for participating in this panel, and close it. Thank you.